Welcome to Simplify to Scale, a show dedicated to helping you scale a high impact and high profit business that you love without all of the complexity and chaos that can keep you trapped in the day-to-day. I'm your host, Krista Grasso, and with decades of scaling experience, I know what actually works and what's just hype. So if you are done with all of the one-size-fits-all scaling advice and all of the overnight success promises, and instead you want proven practical strategies that will help you simplify operations, elevate your leadership, amplify profits, and scale sustainably, let's dive in and get started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Simplify to Scale show. Today is going to be an epic episode. Not that I'm setting you up, Michael, or anything, not at all. But that being said, if you are in certain circles, you know, and you have heard of the mythical Michael Roderick. Like you just hear this name all the time and you're like, who is Michael? Like, who is this guy everyone keeps talking about?
Oh my God.
People that seriously is just one of the most generous, most giving, and just really fairly brilliant souls. And so I'm super excited to have him on the podcast today because I think the fact that people talk about him all of the time when he's not in the room, and there's this curiosity and people are like, wait, who's Michael? Wait, who's this Michael guy everyone keeps talking about? Really gets at the heart of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yes, indeed.
How do you get people to talk about you when you're not in the room? How do you get referred? How do you get remembered? How do you have influence and visibility and all of the things, but in the ick ways that so many people promote? And this is just going to be an absolutely fabulous conversation. And so I always used to do bios and intros, but I've kind of flipped the script. And now, Michael, I'm going to make you tell people about you.
Sure.
Telling them about you. Just give us a little bit of a blurb of kind of how you got where you are today and what.
Sure. Yeah. So the joke I always make about this is I've probably lived about 17 different lives at this point. I started out as a high school English teacher, and I went from being a high school English teacher to becoming a Broadway producer in under 2 years. And a lot of people were kind of curious as to how I did that and how I did that so quickly. And I was getting my master's in educational theater, and I had learned about the power of simulations and how if people act out scenarios, they'll almost always do exactly what they would do in real life. So I started hosting workshops where I simulated networking experiences. I actually had people act out things like one-on-one meetings, job interviews, cocktail parties. And I started building all of these relationship building frameworks and teaching those frameworks, became very involved in the whole relationship building, connecting world. And I kept having people coming to me all the time and saying, you taught me something 3 years ago and I still remember it. Like, what's that all about? So in the same way that I had studied relationship building, I started to study referability. And I started to look at, well, what are the principles that sort of make our ideas, our concepts referable? And that's what really led me into the work that I do today, where I focus on working with subject matter experts who are usually overwhelmed by their expertise. There's so much that they know. There's so many things that they could sort of think about. And the way that I like to think about it is I help them with their IPO. So the packaging and the positioning of their idea to make sure that they're really getting the attention, the packaging and the positioning of the problem that they solve so they're attracting the right audience, and then finally the packaging and positioning of the outcome they provide so that somebody really understands why they should be paid for their brain in the first place. And like I said, lots of other parts of the world. I've been a published playwright. I've worked on lots of different things, but that is the Reader's Digest version, if you will, and what brought me to today.
I find it so fascinating, the windy journeys that we all take and how things that seem so disconnected are the very thing that make us the unique, amazing, magical creatures that we are in what we do
Yes.
for others. Um, and so I love that. And one of the things that really drew me to your work and what you do is I love that you focus on frameworks. I'm very much all about that. I love that you're outcome oriented, very much all about that. So all of you listening, you probably heard him talking and thought, wait a minute. And so, but what I want to bring it back to, because I think this
Yeah.
is so fascinating with IPO,
Mhm.
most people think that the idea is the like most important thing. All it takes is the right idea. And anyone who's
Yes.
been in business for 5 minutes knows, I mean, we have no shortage of brilliant ideas, like the best idea
Yep.
ever. And how many of those actually turn into what we think they should turn into? So let's say the person's got the idea. We know they've got the brilliant idea. So where from there does it start to break down? And where does kind of
Yeah.
the problem and the outcome come into play?
Yeah. So I think that unfortunately in the marketing world, there's been this overemphasis on the idea kind of solving everything, right? Where there's so many narratives that present the idea as almost this Deus ex machina, where I came up with this thing and I did a TED talk and now I'm rich, right? Like it's that kind of dynamic. So you have all these people who end up believing that the idea is enough. And the fact of the matter is, we don't actually pay for ideas. Like it's lovely, it's helpful, to have ideas for things and sort of new ways to do things, but we pay to solve our problems. And a lot of the time, what I see is that we're taught, especially subject matter experts specifically, if you are paid for your brain, there is no doubt that somebody has taught you some version of a pitch that says, I help dog owners in Peoria solve their Facebook ads problem so that they can get the right kind of, dog food for their, like, this is all out there, right? Like we have that particular dynamic, but most people do not care about our solution until we identify their problem. And it's like, okay, you actually understand me. You understand what I'm going through. Now I want to hear how you help or how you solve. And I think the problem that happens, to your question, with the idea is that it's sort of like there's this presentation of, if I'm just brilliant, people will pay me for being brilliant. And that is not the case. There are a lot of brilliant and broke people, in the world. And it's more about, am I developing concepts, frameworks, models that help somebody understand the actual problem that they have? Because that's what gets you inquiry. I think that when you share a problem and somebody says, oh my God, I have that problem, that's exactly what I'm going through, that's what gets the inquiry. But to that point of outcome, nobody's going to spend money until they realize what that money is going to do. So it can't just be, yeah, I understand your problem and pay me $5,000, $10,000. It has to be, we're going to solve this thing, and this is the potential on the other side. This is what's actually going to happen. And you personally know your numbers and you square that with whatever that investment is. And you say, okay, well, if I invest here and this works, then I stand to make 2 times, 3 times, 10 times, whatever the number, right? It ends up being. But it's that aspect. And again, going back to, I think that, and this is really going to tie into when we talk about aspirational versus excellence audiences, there's that aspirational sale of, it's going to be so easy, you just have to have the big idea.
Oh, nothing makes me nothing makes me cringe more. I'm so opposed to the word easy. I think so many people try to make everything sound easy. And I remember I was getting mentored once. Like it was a group call with these big name leaders, and they had selected me to ask a question. And I asked a question, and their advice to me was, Yeah, that sounds like work. You want to make everything sound really, really easy. And so you need to change the name of what you do to be, it was like something super cheeseball and super like make money overnight on a beach in Bali. It's like that kind of thing. And I was like, I cannot believe that this is the advice that it has come to.
Exactly. But it is one of those things where one of them, we'll talk about the difference between the aspirational and the excellence market. But one of the core things to understand in just sort of digging into the aspirational is that the aspirational market is usually the mass market, right? So the aspirational buyer is the person who is really looking for the easy solution and wants to believe that there's an easy solution, wants to believe that there isn't going to be work attached to it. And what it comes down to is the psychology of that particular buyer. So if I'm an aspirational buyer, my thought process goes spend, then speed, then status. So I start with how much does this cost? And my next question is how fast can I get it? And my final question is, will I be like you or will I get the result that you're describing? Without a lot of the work, without a lot of the thing. So the folks in the aspirational side of the market, they are looking for a savior. And this is one of, going back to that big idea side of things, this is one of the biggest dangers that a subject matter expert ends up in, because you are taught, because most marketing success is built on a conversion of mass audience. So basically you're taught as this expert that you have to have this big, broad promise and idea and change the world and all of these things, but you then attract people who believe that you're going to do that and that they don't have to do anything and that there's no effort that's going to be put in. And it's just a bad scenario on both sides because both of you are making promises that you cannot keep. And that's usually the sort of core issue that happens with the aspirational market. Whereas on the other side, you have the excellence side of the market, and they think in an opposite order. They actually start with status, then they go to speed, and then they go to spend. So the excellence buyer knows what they want. They know the future version of themselves that they're interested in, and they know their time is incredibly valuable. So they really do look with a very skeptical eye at whatever time frame you're talking about. And they'll say to themselves, okay, do I really need 6 months to do this? Or can we do it, in a day? Or can we do it in a shorter time frame? And then their final consideration is spent, where they basically say, you know what? If you can get me this result within the time frame that fits my time frame, then I am expecting that this is going to cost more money, because they are not looking for a savior. They don't believe that this person who's they're buying from is a savior. They believe this person is a guide, and that this person is going to give them information that they just do not have yet, because they are what we often will refer to in the marketing circles as batteries included people, right? Where they will actually do the work and take responsibility for themselves. And it's a whole different ball game in terms of what attracts them and what repels them, because the big broad promise that you were talking about, the easy, is almost never going to attract the excellence buyer, because they're not interested in that. And most of the time they don't believe that.
Oh yeah, you tell me something's easy, I sniff BS a million miles away.
Exactly.
And I'm also the person who will pay 4 times more, 5 times more to do a VIP day instead of sit in some big 6 month long program that I could care less about 90% of. I just want one thing.
Yeah.
And but I think I want to dig into this a little more because
Yeah.
what's really so fascinating to me, and I talk about on the podcast a lot, is transformation over transaction. I
Mm,
feel like as you're talking about that aspirational market, to me, that feels very transactional. Like, how can I
yes.
get the highest volume of people to just say yes? If they get an
Yes.
outcome, cool, but really it's on them. They already gave me money. They bought the thing. It's on them. And
Yep.
that's the kind of marketing that I really struggle with. And I think that's why people have a bad taste in their mouth when
Of
it comes
course.
to marketing a lot. Whereas I think what you're talking about here makes so much sense, where it's really more that true transformation for the excellence, right? The like
Yeah.
they know what they want. They're in it for the outcome that you mentioned, the result. And I mean, what a different business model. Like, what a
Yeah.
different feeling to know that you're working with people who are committed and who are going to show up and who are going to do the work. But how much better, how much simpler to work with people who you know are going to probably get results and who you want to actually work with. And you don't have to try to hit the masses in what you do. And
Yeah.
so just kind of let's pull this apart a little bit because I
Of
think it's
course.
counter to so much of what a lot of the big names talk about in marketing.
Yeah.
And why
Yeah.
is that, do you think?
Well, I think what it ultimately comes down to, and this is the most interesting element about this, is that if we look at the most successful, like the most massive companies, the ones that have reached the $1 billion valuations and all of those things, in essence, they've got both markets. And the example that I almost always end up leaning into is Amazon, because Amazon is a purely aspirational marketplace. If you decide you want to buy something, you can just go and search for whatever it is that you want to buy. And if the concern about it getting it fast and getting it cheap is at the top for you, they've got you covered. But if you are incredibly discerning about what you want to buy and what that solution is that you're looking for, and you do want to spend a lot of money, you can go down the rabbit hole of any product on Amazon and find something that's 10, 15, even 20 times the price. So in essence, they have both markets, right? Like they have both sides of the of the market. And the thing that happens is that in the marketing world, the biggest selling point that people often make is around mass, it's around reach, it's around more. And all of the copywriting that you're going to see, if it performed well, it means that it was written in a way that was meant to appeal to the masses. And as an expert, you do have to decide what level of expertise do you want to play in, because you can very easily play the expert. And there are lots of people who do it, but it's mainly an aspirational audience, and you are going to be in a situation where you're trying to convert a percentage of that aspirational audience to make it work, right? Sort of, have it, be something. But here's the other really fascinating thing about this. Everybody comes to an expert as an aspirational buyer initially, because we don't know you. We don't have the context in terms of what what you do, but what you choose to show us and how you choose to communicate basically causes us to either see you as our savior or as the guide. And then there's a middle ground here, which I really just kind of started to tap into recently, that I think is fascinating, which is the excellence curious, where in essence, you've got a buyer who actually thinks status, spend, speed, because they're saying, this is what I want, But I know that if I want to level up, if I want to do more, if I want to be bigger in this particular person's world, I'm expecting that it's probably going to cost more than the $75 course or the ebook or whatever. And I'm actually okay with the fact that if I need to learn this, if I need to go through a process, that it is going to take time and that it is going to sort of live within that, within that space. And that person is often looking for a teacher, really, more so than anything else. They're not looking for a savior. They're not looking for a guide at that point. They're really looking for a teacher. They're looking for somebody to basically like, take me through your ways, and I think that people can start out aspirational by just going and finding us on social media, because social media in essence is an aspirational marketplace where we're all just kind of going and trying to plug into an identity. But we read something, and that something could make us excellence curious and decide, okay, I'm going to follow somebody, or I'm going to be on their mailing list, or I'm going to do something to sort of go deeper. And then for some people, they remain in that excellence curious space and they're like, I'm going to buy the sort of mid-tier thing. And for others, they're in the excellence space and they're like, I don't have the time to waste on the mid-tier thing. I just want to hire this person one-to-one. I just want to go through that process. And it's interesting because I was speaking about this and I was talking about how the aspirational buyer buys a book and may or may not read it and may or may not implement it. The excellence curious buyer buys a book and reads it and then usually looks at what else does this person have. And the excellence buyer sometimes only reads a chapter or a section of a book and says, that person has exactly what I need. And they go to the back of the book and they call that person right away. And they're like, how do I hire you? How do I spend money on you? Because they don't have the time. They're like, I know that this chapter covers what I need. I know that that person could help me solve it. Let's just get to it.
That is so me. It's so me. I can't tell you how many times I've done that. I was chuckling while you were saying that. But that being said, so let's go through a little bit of a pivot in the conversation, but it feeds
Sure.
off of this.
Yeah.
With how do you become the person that someone is talking about when you're not in the room? Because I think it kind of naturally feeds into your yeah. So share a little bit more about that because I do think that is one of your absolute gifts.
Yeah. So ultimately, what it comes down to, I often use this concept of an aim, and that's accessibility, influence, and memory. So your first hurdle always is accessibility. Are you making sure that whatever that first initial thing that you're sharing, are you making it accessible enough for people so that they don't feel stupid? Because if they feel stupid, if they feel like, oh, I'm out of my depth, I don't quite understand what this person's talking about, they tune out almost immediately. And the challenge that the innovative thinker has, the challenge that the person who is a true expert, who really has done a lot of work, is that everything feels simple and easy and makes so much sense to them, but it is a completely different language to the person who's never heard it, right? And who's never sort of lived in that world. So one of the concepts I often use with accessibility is I call it find your Celine. There's this really great story in the book, The Power of Habit, where it talks about Hey Ya by Outkast and how it scored very, very high as a song on the hit machine. It was supposed to be a top song, and all of the radio stations gave it top billing, but people shut it off almost immediately. And the reason for that was if you actually went back to the songs of the time, Hey Ya sounded like nothing else you had ever heard. It had a completely different structure as a song. It had a completely different feel. It didn't feel like it fit within the pop world. So what was actually happening was the primitive part of the brain was like, this is danger. This is dangerous. Shut it off. I can't listen to this. This is new. So what the radio stations did was they found artists who had very, very similar songs and sounds that basically you would want to listen all the way through. And a lot of pop songs are in essence repetitive, right? And one of those artists is Celine Dion, because, if you've heard one Celine song, congratulations, you've heard them all, right? It follows sort of that, like, you can predict it, right? You kind of know what you're in for. So what they did was they would put Celine Dion first, Hey Ya in the middle, and then maybe like Maroon 5 afterwards. And after a while, the unfamiliar became familiar because people would listen all the way through, and eventually Hey Ya got accepted, and that's how it became successful. So we all, as experts, we want to give people our Hey Ya first. We want to tell them our big innovation, our big concept. We want to blow their minds. But the fact is, they're not ready for that. So what we often have to do is we have to find our Celine. We have to figure out what's the thing that most people already understand, and then we introduce the innovation. We share that concept. So that's the accessibility piece, right? We have to first start with that aspect of sort of finding the Celine. And then the second aspect is influence. And a lot of us have the idea that influence is about persuading somebody to do something because of many of the books that we've read, right? But true influence is if you do something without me asking you to do it. So why are you going to do it? You're going to do it because it makes you look good. So if we package our ideas, our concepts, our frameworks in such a way that somebody else wants to share it with somebody else because it makes them look good in sharing it, then it's significantly more referable, because we're basically like, we want others to see how smart we are, how cool we are, what we created. So we're sharing this neat thing we found. But then even if you get those two, the last hurdle and the most important one is memory. If you don't build in memory triggers to what you create, even if it's the best thing in the world, if it's easier to remember for somebody else, they're going to share that person's stuff instead of yours. So we do have to think about, okay, how am I going to make it so that the brain can carry this and keep it in memory? And the way that I like to think about this is, if you want people to remember more, you focus on less. And that's language, emotion, simplicity, and structure. So you first start with language. If I give a name for something and it's my name, you remember that name and then you talk about it with everybody else, right? If I create a distinction like aspirational versus excellence, all of a sudden you're going to talk about it from that standpoint. But then the second piece is emotion, because emotion helps solidify memory. The example I always use with this is, I ask somebody, tell me the opening scenes of the movie Titanic. Nobody can tell me what that looks like. But if I say, tell me what image pops into your head when I say I'll never let go, most people are going to tell you what they see, right? Because there was an emotional moment and it stayed with that. So if we actually tap into that emotion when we're describing something or talking about something, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I'm going to remember that. Like, that's going to stick in my head. But then again, if there's too much information, we're going to forget things. It's going to feel hard. So simplicity is incredibly important. The more succinct we make it. And then finally, our brains need order in order to process information. So if we don't give our audience a structure, if we don't say we start here and we go through this, it's really hard for them to then share it with somebody else. But if I know I have a structure, like if we go back to what I've just been speaking about, AIM, accessibility, influence, and memory, you know that structure and you know the journey that somebody goes on. So it's much easier for you to communicate that to somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much brilliance in there. And I'm curious, where do you see most people kind of, I hate to use the word mistake because it's never a mistake. It's just part of the journey and learning. But where do you see people miss this the most? Like, what's the biggest area of opportunity for people?
I think honestly, it's accessibility, especially for experts. There is always this dynamic in that very early stage where I would say 90% of people open by sharing with me their hey ya. And I'm like, you're gonna do what? Like what is going on? Right? And I'm confused, right? Like I'm not sure what you're trying to sort of make happen. And that's one of the core reasons why I do think opening with and starting with the problem is so much more useful, because problems are incredibly accessible. So if I open with a problem or a challenge and I describe it, you're either going to basically be like, I have that problem or I don't, right? And I think one time I used, especially with messaging, I was like shoemaker's kid syndrome, right? And it's basically like, you know, you're great at packaging and solving everybody else's problem, but your own thing is a mess, right? Like you just can't quite put that same magic that you have onto your own stuff, right? And anybody who that's an issue for them, they're like, oh my God, tell me more. Like, talk to me more, you know, about that problem. And it feels accessible to them. So then bringing up, okay, well, you know, if you have somebody with that outside perspective, here's what they can do. Here's how they can help you. Here's the support that you need, in that regard. It's so much easier to talk about the solutions that we have once people have identified the problem. And the way that I like to think about it is that people are usually not willing to invest in a transformation until they've had a revelation. So if you're able to sort of open with something that gives them a revelation and causes them to be like, oh my God, that's me. That's exactly what I'm doing. Like that is, oh man, you nailed it. They're just gonna, the inquiry part is gonna be so simple because they're just gonna be like, okay, you got me. You know what's wrong with me. Like, tell me how I fix it. I don't know. Like what's the deal?
Yeah, I think the sign of a great conversation is like, were you listening to my conversation this morning? Are you in my head? When people say things like that, you're like, okay.
Exactly. And it's, also just from like a thought leadership standpoint, when you're sharing your understanding or your articulation of a problem, people feel less alone. They feel like you get it, you understand, and they want to learn more from you. They want to follow you. They want to sort of go into that place because they've been walking around trying to figure out what are the words for what the heck it is that's happening to me right now. And then you give them those words and they're like, oh my God, thank you. Because now I know what it is. And now I can start to think about what could I do about it. But again, all too often, I think it's that first accessibility piece where there is no conversation about the problem. There is no conversation about what is a core desire or need or something that pretty much everybody relates with, that has your innovation, your nuance on that particular concept or that particular, idea.
Yeah, it makes so much sense because if you can't even start and get that association up front, then how can it be someone or something that's super memorable? Like
Yeah.
it's trying to skip to step 3 in a way by following
E-
the same
ex-
pattern we've all, I know,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. The number of people that I've met that like went directly to memory, right? And they're giving you this like snappy tagline, or they're giving you this, uh, acronym that is like 17 letters long, right? Where you're like, I work with aqualites, and you're like, oh my God, achievers who do, so you're like, I know, no, just stop, give me like 3. Spell a very, very simple word. I can't deal, kind of
Oh my gosh, so true. All right. So listen, we're going to go a little long today, but there's so much brilliance here. We just need to keep going. And so
thing.
I'm going to pivot you into another topic that you talk about a lot that I
Sure.
find just absolutely fascinating. And then for all of you listening, I promise we're going to tell you where to find Michael so you can go follow him. But if you're in a rush, just look at the show notes, but keep listening and come back. So that being said, let's talk about the triple threat.
Yes. Yes. So, coming from the theater world, right? There's the concept of the triple threat as a performer, and the idea is that you can do three of the performing talents all well. So if you are an actor, singer, dancer, for example, it means that you are a phenomenal actor who can sing, and as a dancer, you can move, right? You're not amazing. You're not going to be winning any choreography awards, but you're solid enough to be in an ensemble for a musical and really kind of do some decent work in that regard. And in that industry, what a lot of people don't understand is the order of those things, those talents, is actually incredibly important to your success, because if your superpower is acting, then you probably want to spend more time focusing on film and TV. You probably want to focus on musicals that have a really good book and, have good book scenes so you can really show off your acting chops. And you probably want to look at, like, are there plays with really meaty characters, right? But if it's on the flip side, and let's say dancing is really where you're doing your best work, you're going to want to spend way more time looking at ensembles, moving up the ranks of being an associate choreographer or choreographer to build. And you're probably going to start looking at music videos and different things that you can do that are going to emphasize that talent. So as I started to think about this specifically in the world of thought leadership and ideas, what I landed on was that we all have a triple threat of thinking talent. And basically we just have natural talents in the way our brains work. And how I refer to this is the scientist, the celebrity, and the magician. So if scientist is your top thinking talent, then you're a highly analytical thinker. You're really good at breaking things down, understanding things. You love, like, sitting in the lab and doing all the research and figuring things out to this hyper granular degree. But you may not be nearly as excited about speaking, being out front, doing all the relational stuff. Like, you may really just want to spend most of your life in the lab, if that is your top sort of thinking talent. Whereas if celebrity is your top thinking talent, you're highly relationally driven. You're always kind of wanting to be around people. You enjoy the presentational aspects of things, and you may not be nearly as excited about the science of it all. And you may basically kind of be like, I don't understand a lot of it. I don't want to do the research. I don't want to break all these things down. I just want to hang out with people, right? And have a good time. And if magician is your top thinking talent, then you are 100% wired for novelty. You're an incredibly innovative thinker. You're always coming up with sort of new angles and new ways of doing things, but repetition will kill you. It is so hard for you, even if something is going to make you successful, to keep doing the same thing, because that desire for novelty becomes so important. So the thing is, when you put these thinking talents in order, a lot of the time what ends up happening is you realize, going back to a lot of what we've been talking about, the marketing tools that you've been taught actually don't line up with who you are and how you think. And the example that I always like to use around this is scientists, because I often like to think about it as, it's much easier to be the Dr. Phil to somebody's Oprah than to be Dr. Phil trying to be Oprah. And if you are a scientist, you're going to get way more traction out of people interviewing you and asking you about the science and sort of breaking down sort of all of those types of things than you are going on, social and trying to do like the tips and tricks thing, because it's just not who you are and it's not what excites you. It's not what really, really matters. So when I started noticing this, it was so interesting because I would pick up on as I would work with people. Oh, well, of course that marketing technique did not work for you because you're a celebrity and you're not even getting a chance to talk to people by using this funnel system or this process or whatever. So of course you're going to be bored and bothered, by that particular thing, or you're a magician. So yeah, you're not going to be able to plug into somebody's simple system because the system's going to annoy the crap out of you because you want variety. Like you want something really interesting. So it's been really fascinating. Once I've started to sort of dig into people's thinking talents and how that actually affects the offers that they create, the thought leadership that they build, and things of that nature.
Yeah, when I first heard this, I absolutely loved it because I'm not what most people would probably think. Depends on how you know me, but I'm magician, celebrity, scientist.
Yeah,
Scientist is my lowest, 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 lowest one. But I teach people systems and I teach people structure. But the interesting thing is, the reason I did that is because I had to reinvent the ones that existed because the ones that existed were too restrictive, made no sense, and did not work. And even
yeah,
in my certification programs, I do not give people a prescriptive path. I don't, because I don't believe there is one. I teach them how to think and I give them tools they can use. And then it's up to them to figure out the right solutions in the right context. And so it
yeah,
works really well for that same type of thinker. But for the scientists, it's very challenging for them. I've learned not to actually let them into my certification program because they
yeah,
want the step by step tell me exactly what to do and exactly what to do. And it does depend. There is no prescriptive path. And so it's just really fascinating. But when you described those three, it immediately clicked for me in a way
yeah.
that was quite fascinating.
Yeah, and it is one of these things where a lot of the time you have this realization about yourself and you're just like, oh, well, that's why I didn't like that experience. That's why I wasn't excited about working on this or working with this person. And what's also really fascinating too is that there will be instances in which the magician will be incredibly attractive to the scientist, right? Where basically, if somebody really is like leaning into that scientific side and they're thinking in a particular way, they're blown away by the magician because they're like, how do you even think like that? Like, how can you imagine a different world? I only see the world in this, in this particular way. And to your point of what you were describing is, that can work for or against you, right? Because if you've got the scientist who's basically like, I'm expecting the 5-step program that will take me through and do X, Y, Z, that's not a very good client. But if you've got the scientist who's basically like, I understand the structure and the things that I need to do, but I also understand that there needs to be some innovation in my life. So I want to be around somebody who's innovative. It can be an incredibly powerful relationship. And if we go back to the order as well, I'm also a magician, celebrity, scientist, but one of my really good friends and thought partners is a magician, scientist, celebrity. And the way that they are able to process and think and look at what I'm doing versus the way that I'm able to look at what they're doing relationally is such a compliment because of that slight shift in order. We're both magicians, but we have this second that is so different in terms of what we understand and what works for us.
It's so fascinating. Such a great framework. But with that, tell people how they could learn more if they want to dig deeper into this,
Sure.
and if they'd like to know how to work with you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so if you go to smallpondenterprises.com, I write a daily email, so you can always sign up there and just sort of get my different riffs, as the days go by. And then there's also a section of the website that is titled "I Want to Dance with Somebody," and that walks you through all the different offerings that I am developing and working on. And that's always classic magician. That's always being updated. So you can go and check that out.
Fantastic. All right. So there's a question I ask everybody, and I'm super curious to hear what you're going to say. But
Yeah.
in your business, how do you scale smarter and keep things lean?
I do everything I can to leverage my time as opposed to trade it. So relationships are probably one of the toughest things because you want to stay in touch with people. You want to continue sort of those connection points, but scheduling an hour with this person, an hour with that person can be completely overwhelming in terms of schedule. So most of the time, I will find opportunities to bring people together, and it leverages my time. It gives me the opportunity to still touch base with folks, give them a chance to connect with each other, get to meet each other. But it also gives me the ability to touch base with them, kind of know what's going on in their world without scheduling one-to-one, 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 one-to-one.
Brilliant. I love it. All right. I feel like we could talk for days, but
I know.
let's leave people with one final tip or one final key takeaway that you think would be really important for them.
Yeah. So the one I always lean into is that the keys to all the doors you need open are in other people's pockets. And that also means that right now you are sitting with a pocket full of keys. There are people that you can help that if you just have more conversations about their problems and their challenges, you could be the perfect person for them. So don't underestimate what you can do and all the possibilities that there are, because you never know how you can help somebody until you ask, until you have that conversation.
Brilliant. Michael, thank you so much for being here and sharing your brilliance with us all. Everyone, be sure to connect with him. All the links will be down below in the show notes, and I'll see you again next week. If you are a visionary founder ready to get yourself out of the day-to-day operations of your business and scale in a much more simple, sustainable way, I have just the thing. Register to join me for my Scale Simpler workshop at scalesimpler.com. In it, I break down the hidden barriers that keep you trapped in the day-to-day of your business and what to do to finally extract yourself once and for all so things do not keep coming back onto your plate. And if you're someone who partners with founders as their right-hand advisor, consultant, or fractional, I invite you to explore our scaling certification and licensing programs at strategicopsinstitute.com.